Hi, and welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Today we're working on our applique project, Miss Kelly. And I wanted to bring you up to date on what I've accomplished and some things I've learned and some adjustments we're going to make to this project. And I have 4 items that I'd like to share with you today about things that are happening. First of all, let's talk about updates. Where are we? Here is what I have so far. I have one of these is not quite finished. This one is not sewn on. The birds are not sewn on, and the bias tape stem is not sewn on. And there are a couple of things going on with that I'd like to share with you and tell you what the next steps are going to be. So first of all, when I got the birds made and I have them pinned here, you will see, if you look closely here, that this bird is actually touching the stem. And when you lay out the fabric with the pattern underneath it and place those birds where that pattern says it should be, that's what happens. Now the problem is that the pattern, here's the full pattern, and you'll notice here that that bird is almost on that line. And to show you a little better, here is an actual size pattern. Look at how close that bird is to that line, especially on this side over here. And when you take that line and change that line into a 1/4 inch bias tape, then you have this. And this to me does not look right. So what I'm going to do, and the 2 reasons why the birds aren't sewn on. First of all, I've noticed how close they are, and I needed to think about how I wanted to resolve that. And second, I ran out of thread that color. So after my trip to the store to get the right color thread for the birds, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the birds out at least 1/4 inch from the edge of that bias tape. And I can do that simply by adjusting where this background fabric lays relative to the pattern. So I'm just going to slide it out 1/4 inch away from that center stem and reposition the birds on both sides. Now, what that means is everything attached to the birds will be adjusted slightly. So these, the stem with this flower and these leaves is going to come out just a little bit. That won't be an issue because it attaches there in the feathers. And we'll also need to make a slight adjustment up here in the flowers. And because when we move that bird out, then the leaves here are going to be too close to the bird's head. So we will make just very, very, very slight adjustments simply by moving the bird out. And then once the bird is placed, we should be able to position the bird over the bird and then place everything else right where the pattern shows. I think that will take care of it. We just need to be very mindful that whatever we do on one side, we do on the other side. So that means we're going to be checking it for the symmetry a lot. And we also need to watch our mirrored images because we had a problem with the birds, and because we're using images on both sides, we just need to watch that. Now, you'll notice I added the vase down here. This was a piece of fabric. It was a fat 1/4 that I had in my stash. And then I've used the little light green fabric that we used up here in these large leaves. I did something different because I was curious. And you know, curiosity will either lead us down a path of errors and problems, or curiosity will show us ways that we can be more efficient. What I did to get that vase pattern, it was going to take almost a whole sheet of this template paper because I would have to run it landscape over the design to be able to cut it out. Now I could do that and then cut patterns from the vase afterwards. But I said, let me try something different. How can I go about getting an applique of that vase? Now, first of all, it's a pretty simple design. It's just got an outward curve and an inward curve and 2 straight lines. So it's pretty simple. I thought about sewing it on the machine using a piece of fabric on the top and a piece of fabric on the bottom and then turning it and clipping the seams. That would have worked pretty well, but you would have had a lot of bulk on the edges and I wasn't sure how that would work. I also didn't want to introduce a different fabric that I wasn't sure had been pre-washed. So you're shrinking, when you get to a point where you wash this, you don't want your shrinking to be a problem. I also thought about doing it a way some appliques are done, and they use that same technique of sewing it together on the machine, but they use a interfacing or a fusible interfacing. And again, that would have made that area very stiff, and I didn't want that. So what I decided to try was, instead of making the template out of the heat-proof mylar, I made a template out of paper. And let me tell you, I went just about as cheap and as simple as I possibly could. I made it out of a piece of notebook paper. Now, if I did this again, I would probably recommend doing something like cardstock, because when the edges of the paper got the starch on them, they wanted to crinkle, and when the iron hit them with that steam, I don't know if you can tell it, but the edges of the paper look like paper that's gotten wet. It was a little tricky to do, but it did work. And I think that given the fact that it would have taken a whole sheet of mylar, it was a smart choice. I also did the little pieces at the top and the bottom of the vase the same way, just so it would be consistent. They were very simple. They were just rectangles with squared off corners, which is easy to do. It took a little longer to iron those in place than it would have with the mylar, but given that this stuff is probably $2 to $3 a sheet and we're trying to keep our expenses low, that's the way I chose to go. So there's another option. If you have something super simple, or you find yourself in a pinch and you need to applique something simple to any kind of project, this might work. Again, I think I would use a cardstock if I did it again. If you did not have this sharp inward curve here, it would have been even easier. This was the hardest part right here to do. And then that little tiny flare at the bottom, I did manage to get that a little better on one side than the other, but you can do it. Now, let's see. Oh, the one thing I found that I thought was very interesting, if you look at this picture of the design, down here in the vase, you know, there's 3 flowers. There's 3 that I have. But in looking at this design, I noticed something else, and it's a little hard to tell because the vase in her illustration or picture, I would think this probably came from a picture. The fabric she used was a floral, and I don't have that here. But in looking at this very close, I also noticed that she added 4 leaves. She has 2 leaves coming here and 2 leaves coming here. And those are not on the pattern. I don't know if it was an afterthought or if it was something simply that it wasn't noticed. She got the 2 leaves that were here in the pattern, but not the 2 at the bottom. And there could have been some document or disclosure at a later time talking about those. But as I said before, this pattern is, I want to say 2011. So it's been out a good long time, and I wouldn't really expect that something that long ago that, oh, excuse me, it's 2010, so it's 13 years ago, copyright 2010. So that might not be something that you would even think about 13 years later that you need to send that correction with them. Or it could simply be that these were optional. Now, given that my vase is very plain compared to hers, what I'm going to do is I'm not, well, I've already done that. I've stitched both sides here where the leaves would be. But I'm going to go ahead and finish it, and then as I get towards the end, I'm probably going to add those leaves in. I don't have one that's actually folded, but I think that that would really add to it and really kind of mute this vase a bit, because it is a huge area of the design in just one fabric. So I think that will be helpful. Now, I think I've covered all the things I wanted to cover with you today. As I said, my next steps are going to be to get these birds adjusted out slightly and get them sewn on, leaving an area here for the feathers, and the feathers will be my next item that I'm going to work on. So probably in the next video you'll see some information about the feathers, and then we'll get those on and then move to the flowers and the leaves. And I do have, I wanted to show real quickly, since we have that vase on now. Let's get rid of all this thread. But we're going to have, you know, we're going to have the feathers come out, and then there's a stem with leaves and a flower down here, and those are going to look something like that on there, just to give you an idea. So we're working away, and I think we've made great progress. We've learned some things. I've learned some stuff. I learned that I could do a piece with the paper as the template, which is great information to know. I have learned that if you're going to make any of the templates that you have to use more than once, you definitely want the Mylar template, because they are much easier to iron on and get the shape that you need correctly. And I think anything with a concave arc or curve, the Mylar is the best way to go as well. And anything that's very intricate, like these flowers. When I started these and I was trying to do it without the fray check, it was much more difficult than trying to do it with the fray check, and having the heat-proof Mylar to iron on was great. Anyway, that's where we are today. That's all I have to share with you. Please be sure to like our video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any videos on this series or any others. And we'll see you next time at the Shamrock Quilt Studio.